two complementary presentations. We haven't got a huge amount of time for questions, but let's go straight now to questions and comments on those presentations. So, yeah.
Hello, I'm Lenny Wild. I work in the Politics and Governance programme here at ODI, and I'm part of the team that's been working to kind of map and better understand the sorts of common blockages and bottlenecks to service delivery that can be rooted in the political and the governance context that Heidi was talking about. I think it's really helpful because it takes us on a bit from just talking generically about political will or incentives to kind of trying to pin down a bit more concretely what we're talking about. And it's really exciting to see this work that Heidi's doing, and to hear the stories from Nepal where actually changes in the governance context mean those bottlenecks are overcome in very concrete ways. And that's, I think, a really helpful lesson for us as well. So two quick questions from me. One is, Heidi, it was interesting hearing you talk about some of the kind of features of effectiveness or what seems to be working about different aid packages. They almost sound like part of the kind of process for doing external assistance rather than the package. You know, there are things about adaptation, about innovation, about brokering or coaching. You know, that's I think that links up very well with discussions we've been having throughout this conference about how, you know, the changing face of aid, if you like. So to what extent do you think you're talking about process as much as a particular package? And then very quickly, and perhaps comments also here from the minister from Nepal would be, you know, to what extent are there particular, you know, you talked about different kinds of constraints. So policy incoherence, when there's overlapping jurisdictions, too many actors, not enough coordination, versus that kind of local level problem solving. To what extent have you seen, you know, different interventions being needed to address those different kinds of problems?
Thank you very much, Heidi. Philip, sorry, Lenny. Philip at the back and then at the front.
Hi, my name is Philip Krause. I'm also with ODI. I should add, by way of explanation, I'm not involved in the organization of this panel, and so I'm just wondering if it was designed on purpose that we had one half, which was the sort of self-referential donor discussion, and now the second half, which is the problems of the real world discussion. And my question to either of the panelists really would be, to what extent do you feel that this concern about donors thinking about results monitoring, tying themselves to a measurement of results, donors thinking about what are the right kinds of partners that we want to work with, which are big issues in DC, which are big issues in London, it seems there's almost no connection to governance constraints, windy mountains in the Himalayas, the sorts of stuff that you really need to overcome. Would either of you care to try and draw some connection between what you've heard in the previous panel, how maybe these sorts of aid governance linkages, Heidi, that you've been thinking about could be tied back to a bigger focus on results? Or is that just so completely irrelevant that you might as well not think about any further if you want to think about real solutions? I'm obviously exaggerating slightly, but hopefully.
Thanks, Philip. We had a question here at the front as well.
Yeah, Dan Kress, Chief Economist at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. An aid skeptic might say this, and that, you know, if you look at the correlations between aid and health outcomes, they're extremely weak, and oftentimes it's basically kind of a scatter plot. And so you might, an aid skeptic might say, well, really, you know, you're spending a lot of time trying to measure something that really doesn't matter, and yet, ultimately, and so, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? And then they might say, well, actually, policies really do matter. And so say something like the AMA policy, which was, you know, which we know from other countries, if you look at the evaluations of, say, the JSY program in India, and I don't know what the similar evaluations are there, those policies have a really big effect. You know, you see a utilization of institutional deliveries goes up by 40, 50, 60%, and you see actual effects on neonatal mortality. So I'm wondering if, you know, is it aid or is it policy, and you know, should we actually maybe try to tease out the effect?
Romilly.
Thanks, Romilly from ODI. This is a question really for Heidi and Liz, because both of them talked about the importance of getting the right incentives to ensure that aid actually contributes to results. But Liz, if I understood you correctly, seemed to be taking quite a hands-off approach of, you know, the country decides what to do, we're just there at the end and pay the money if it works. Heidi's taking a very hands-on approach and saying, no, the donors need to get down and dirty and really get in there and do lots of political economy analysis. And I'm very interested from both of you perhaps to reflect on the other one's perspective, to say, what are the, you know, why do we think that this way is better than the alternative way? Or perhaps I'm misunderstanding the difference between your approaches. But I think, you know, both of you are trying to say, how do we use aid to get better results, but very contrasting in my mind. And that answers your question a little bit, Philip, that our interpretation of this panel is actually there's different ways. We're all interested in results, as Liz says. There's actually different ways of conceptualizing how we get there. So I think that's a bit the framework.
Okay. We have a question here.
Thank you. Just a quick question to Dr. Babu.
Can you introduce yourself?
Agretisa from South Sudan.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the clear and impressive presentation that you shared with us. The quick question relates to issues relating to data. Would you share with us how you went about really designing a data collection mechanism that was able to track down the impressive progress recorded within a period of a decade? How exactly this one was handled, I think, will shed light to the rest of some of us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That's a very good question. Thanks. We're going to. I'm going to move on now to leave enough time for the end. David, do you just want to come in quickly at this point? Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry. I'm under pressure now also to finish in time for the final panel. But I do want to give actually Liz the first word at this point in terms of those comments, and then before going back to the panel, possibly Susan too, if she's in the room.
Thanks very much. I mean, it's a really good question, Romilly, and I suppose my instinctive reaction to the first challenge was, no, they're not different worlds. You know, DFID is there alongside the government of Nepal, and I think, you know, that's some of what we were hearing about. You know, I spoke about a particular thing from a particular perspective in 15 minutes. So where there's a lot of different things going on in aid, and maybe some of the thinking now is around how we differentiate and understand those things differently. So there's something which is around finance transfers, there's something which is around knowledge sharing, and there's something which is around technical assistance and technical cooperation. And I don't think all of those things have to reside in one, you know, in a single actor. So, for example, you know, the UK is in a position and feels a moral obligation to be in the finance transfers business. That's what 0.7 is all about. It's about, you know, kind of recognising that we're in that position to be able to do that. But we would like, I think, country governments such as Nepal to have choices about who they get down and dirty with. You know, they might want to take finance from one actor in one basis and actually choose who they partner with to learn, share knowledge, etc. So I don't think these things all have to go alongside. Currently, of course, I think they do. You know, the UK is making finance transfers, it's involved in technical assistance, it actually has a really strong country presence. I mean, I think, you know, if there's anything that this sort of UK aid programme stands for, it's for very strong country presence and for really deep partnerships within country. So I think at the moment, you know, we're doing lots of those things, but we want a world in which governments are choosing where they get their assistance and choosing who they share knowledge with. So that's the vision I think that we're trying to build. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Susan, I think I saw Susan come back in. Yeah. Do you want to also comment?
Well, in the interest of time, because I know there are so many questions, I completely concur with Liz. I think, you know, we're really looking at a lot of different modalities in order to achieve those results. So I'll pass it on.
Thanks very much. Well, we'll come back to the panel at this point. Then, Heidi, do you want to take some of those?
Yes, perhaps I'll start off on the question that Romilly raised, given that Liz has just talked to that. I mean, I think cash on delivery is a really interesting idea, and I think it's great that DFID are piloting it. Oh, sorry. I think in a way, to some extent, as you said, the jury's still out on how effective that's going to be, but it's certainly worth seeing. I absolutely agree that it's important to make sure that country ownership is really at the forefront. And actually, interestingly, the packages we looked at, as I mentioned, sort of did largely work on the basis that they were providing operational support and coaching, and weren't actually bringing any policy dialogue to the table. So they were literally just assisting governments with actually implementing their legal frameworks, etc., as with the Local Government Development Programme. I think one thing to perhaps think about is where such sort of, I don't know whether hands-off, hands-on is the right way to describe it. I'm sort of still undecided, but where certain approaches are most appropriate. You know, the risk, and to some extent with cash on delivery, is it might pick winners. You know, those that are already delivering services very effectively, whereas those that perhaps face, you know, serious governance challenges, there might be scope for other types of programs to come in to help facilitate changes in the mechanics in that way. The question Philip raised about measuring results and getting results, I mean, I think Romilly explained that quite nicely, that I think there is obviously a question about how do we get results, and there are lots of different ways of getting results, and then there's a separate question about how we measure results. And there is a risk with the real sort of attention given to results, that all the discussion focuses on how we measure results and how we measure attribution. But equally important is this discussion on how do we actually get results, and the various different intervention logics different types of aid programs have. And I guess our focus on thinking about whether aid can address governance constraints builds on that, on the assumption that actually you need to strengthen specific governance conditions in a sector to actually deliver on effective results. And, you know, 20 years of the literature has told us about that. Process features or activities. Yes, I mean, I agree with that point, Lenny. In fact, actually, in a previous draft of the slides, we actually had the conditions we mentioned related to adaptation and also sort of smart implementation categorised as process features. I think, in a way, we're interested in dividing the aid package into one, actually looking at the activities that may be best targeted to address governance constraints, and then two, looking at the way they can actually nudge forward institutional change. And I think perhaps that's the most interesting part, actually, and I think a lot of work has been done on that. Maybe, I think Ben mentioned he's been doing some thinking about that related to complexity, and obviously Lant Pritchett is writing quite a bit on that at the moment. And then aid or policy. I mean, I think that's a very interesting question, and I don't think I'm able to answer that, but I mean, my hunch would be policy and political support, but yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Heidi. Dr. Morosini, the final word.
Thank you very much for the questions, and I think the coordination issue is getting better and better, and even the personal donors. Previously, what they used to go, many of you have already gone the Annapurna trekking circle. And if they used to go in the mountainside, and then the people used to say, what do you want? Then they wanted, we want a hospital. So they used to establish a small health clinic. And they were funding, and they were funding for a few years, and they're now tired. And so that was a parallel type of structure created. So many of them are now closed, and people are having problems. So these sort of things are not happening now. This was a previous practice before 2000, and now people have begun to come to Ministry of Health and ask, where do you need this? I have this sort of provision. I want to help Nepal, and I want to help in health sector. What is your priority? So we tell them that this is our priority, and this is how, if you do it, we will take the total ownership in future. So this is how we are trying to coordinate, even with the small personal donors. And aid or policy, I think there is a great relation between aid and the policy. If there is a policy, there is no budget. How we will implement it? And if there is a budget or aid and there is no policy, that's not going to work. So I think they are interrelated, and both of them are interrelated. And because we are a poor country, so it has a definitely it has a great meaning. So we have a health management information system. Every month, every 7th day of the month, when the 1 month crossed, on 7th day, the district health office has to send the district health report to the Department of Health Services, and the Department of Health Services sends report to the Ministry of Health. So this is a regular system, and outside this, we go for the joint monitoring. So there is a joint monitoring system. Once or twice in a year, we go with the donors in the just this is a field observation only. We don't collect any data, but we regularly do household surveys. Every 2.5 years, there is a Nepal Living Standard Survey. Nepal Living Standard Survey measures some of the health indicators also, like immunization, family planning, safe motherhood, some of the diseases. And every another 2.5, every 5 years we do Nepal Demographic and Health Survey. This is how we are trying to bring the results and money and have created the mechanism of monitoring.
Great. Well, many thanks to all 4 of the panelists. A very rich session. We now have a quick changeover of 5 minutes, as I understand, before the final panel, which Simon Maxwell will be moderating. But yeah, many thanks.